Good evening, guys. So, um, lesson February 7th, 2021. Joseph is protected in Egypt, and this is lesson number 10. The key verse is, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian." Genesis, the 39th chapter, verse 2. We are going through this lesson, Genesis, the 39th chapter, verses 1 through 4, the 7th verse through the 12th, and the 19th verse through the 23rd verse. I want you to pay attention to something, and that is the Lord is with Joseph. Over and over and over again, you see that phrase, the Lord was with Joseph. And it's important for you and I to recognize not only that the Lord is with Joseph, but I want you to understand that on Joseph's part, Joseph understood who God was in his life and how he was with him. Whether it be in the dugout pit, sold into slavery, whether it be in Potiphar's house, whether it be running from persecution, Joseph was someone who knew who God was in his life, and he also knew that God was with him. So let's start off the lesson. Joseph's brothers, obviously they mistreated him, and they treated him very badly. They were jealous of him because he was like his father's favorite. One great lesson here is that we do not have any control over how others regard us. Joseph had a choice. And I want you to get that. Joseph could either have been bitter and could never get to a point of forgiving his brothers, or he could forgive his brothers and live a life that was pleasing to God, putting God first in his life. The life of Joseph is a picture of the condition of a believer in Jesus. And understand that of the time period we're talking about, Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery, which you just think about that, and his brothers, putting him into a pit, and then him being sold into slavery, and then Potiphar taking and purchasing him and making him one of his one of the people in his life that was one of his slaves, and then taking and raising him up into a higher position in his household. But you look at this, and of his 110 years before he passed away, majority of his time was spent in Egypt. And yet he never took on citizenship of being an Egyptian. He remained a Jew. He remained having his home in Canaan. And it's important for you and I to understand that Joseph never gave up on who he was, whose he was, and where he was going. He considered heaven to be his home. If we keep heaven in our hearts, we can face our trials and endure our hardships, knowing that they are temporary, and also knowing that they are working for us an eternal weight of glory. That was the remarkable spirit of Joseph. Section number 1, Joseph's success. Genesis, the 39th chapter, Joseph's 39th chapter, verses 1 through 4, says, And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he had did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. Let's go back to verse 2. It says, And the Lord was with Joseph. I want you to really key in on that, because throughout this reading, you see that that Joseph understood that God was with him. And then also, even though his master saw that the Lord was with him. So it's not just that Joseph saw it. Joseph lived it. He lived knowing that God was with him. And it's important for you to get that, because Potiphar picked up on this too. Now understand, Potiphar was an idolater. He believed in all the different gods that you had in Egypt. And yet he saw the difference that Joseph in his life had, and that was that he saw that Joseph, there was only one God, and that one God was God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, Jesus, So when it came to his belief, he lived it. He lived his life the way that it should be lived. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. Now, I want you to get this, because, he served a man who obviously wasn't a Jew. He served a man who was in a different country. He served a man who believed in other gods. And yet Joseph, he knew who his God was. He followed after who his God was. So no matter what happens to us, God cares for us, and he is in charge of everything that happens to us. Every child of God should be spiritually refreshed by this simple truth that we are never alone. It would have been easy for Joseph to think of himself as alone and forsaken. His family had thought to kill him, but then sold him into slavery. The Ishmaelites had asked no questions and bought him, and thinking only about making money by selling him to the Egyptians. I mean, just think about this. If you want to take on the view that, woe is me, then Joseph, of all people, had the right to take and act that way. And yet, you look at this, the success that Joseph showed was because God was with him. And we really need to get that. We need to understand that the success that we have is because God is with us. God led Potiphar to the Ishmaelites, who had just acquired a young man from Canaan. Potiphar bought Joseph and soon recognized Joseph's ability and made this young Hebrew overseer of his household. Notice the confidence and the boldness that Joseph had. Potiphar was moved not only by the success of Joseph and his management skills, but also by the knowledge that God was with this young man. Evidently, Joseph made no secret of the fact that his abilities were the result of the presence of God in his life. This must have been a strange message to this idolatrous Egyptian, Potiphar. Potiphar may not have believed in God, but he did notice that prosperity that Joseph attributed to God. We do not know the size of Potiphar's household, but we do know that Joseph was in charge. A fascinating principle taught here is stated in Luke, the 22nd chapter, verses 24 through 30, is that God asks us to be servants before he allows us to be rulers. God was preparing Joseph for great things in his future, but matters were about to get worse for him. Genesis, the 39th chapter, verses 7 through 12, says, "And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not that is with me in this house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" See, his thought process wasn't sinning against his master. His thought process was sinning against God. It says, verse 10, "And it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out." Jesus taught in Matthew, the 5th chapter, verse 28, that a man who looks or lustfully on a woman has already committed adultery in his heart. We see from this passage that the same things apply equally to women. Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph was a handsome young man, and she did not mince words about what she wanted. She brazenly said, Lie with me. She wanted to have sex with him. And, he's in charge of Potiphar's household. He's staying to where he is being obedient to his master, but he is also being obedient to God. Keep in mind the relationship between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. She was a mistress of the house and he was a slave. And a slave could not disobey the request of his master. Potiphar's wife did not expect Joseph to object in the least to her command. It's obvious that she had done this before, To his credit, Joseph refused the request. While many young men might dream of having such an opportunity, Joseph knew that this was a wicked act, and he refused. At first, he tried to reason with Potiphar's wife. He correctly reminded her that he had been given complete control of all that was in the house. Potiphar had trusted Joseph, and it would be a violation of the trust for Joseph to commit adultery with his master's wife. Joseph then added that this was an act of great wickedness and that it was a sin against God. If the woman had any morality at all, she would have seen that Joseph was right. Sadly, we often desire most what we cannot have. Day after day, she kept on trying to lure him into having intimate relationship with him. And day by day, Joseph stepped carefully around his dangerous situation. You see the scheme that she sets up. And she sets up a scheme of making sure that all the people are out of the household and making sure that it's just her and Joseph. And by doing that, she basically set up a situation where she couldn't take and excuse his behavior of refusing her. And so she then accused Joseph of attacking her and using the garment as proof. She kept the garment in her hand until Potiphar came home and repeated the story for him, and Potiphar was angry and had Joseph put in prison. How would that make you feel? I mean, you trust in God, you do exactly what it is you know is right, and yet you're suffering for righteousness' sake. And that's exactly what took place with Joseph. He was suffering for righteousness' sake. Genesis, the 39th chapter, verses 19 through 23, says, And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. Okay, we see this again. But the Lord was with Joseph. It doesn't matter if you're on the mountaintop, doesn't matter if you're in the valley, God is with you. Not only understand that, but take that to heart to where you realize no matter what I go through, I am never alone. God is with us. And it says, But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. And the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. When we commit our way unto the Lord is going to bless that. When we take and put God first, the Lord is going to bless that. And he did that in Joseph's life. In a few hours, Joseph had gone from good situation to a horrible one. He had been in charge of Potiphar's household, and now he was in the prison, apparently for life. However, the Lord was still with Joseph. God had a greater household in mind, that of Potiphar's, for Joseph to rule. Notice this. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him before Pharaoh and asked for his release from prison. The cupbearer forgot about Joseph, and for 2 long years Joseph languished in prison. That's 2 years. That's 2 years for doing what it is you knew was right. He suffered in prison, and yet his suffering was a joy to him. His suffering was something that he counted as something of showing your faith in God. Why? Because God was with him. God would use Joseph's experience in prison to bring Joseph to even greater prominence in Egypt. This account teaches us the providential power of God, no matter what unfair and cruel treatment we may experience. Because we examine these incidents through the clear vision of history, we know the end of the story. Remember that Joseph lived this without knowing the outcome. He walked by faith, and faith is confidence that God will be with us in the uncertain future. It was a tragedy when Joseph was sold into slavery. Out of that tragedy, Joseph rose to prominence in the house of Potiphar. Joseph was a slave. It wasn't something that you would desire. You know? I mean, seriously, look at this. Not only was he a slave, he was hated by his brothers. Then another tragedy beyond his control came, and Potiphar's wife lusted for him. Her lust ended with Joseph unjustly accused and imprisoned. This is a great illustration of most of our lives. We live from mountaintop to valley and repeat the process over and over again. In spite of the triumph or tragedy, God is working out his master plan for his children. We do not know what that plan is, and neither did Joseph, but God did. God knew his plan. God knew that Joseph wanted to stay by his side. God's plan was certain to come to pass. When we are disappointed, we need to remember God is always with us and working for us. We are never alone, and we are never forsaken. We are a child of the King, and we are a child of someone who loves us dearly. Remember that. Remember that in your daily walk. What's interesting in this passage is that you see Joseph, he wasn't timid. He wasn't somebody who held back. He loved God, and he showed that in his daily walk. And because he did that, people that were around him knew how powerful his God was, how faithful his God was to him, how much he prospered at the hand of God. Think about how you would have handled some of these situations. Would you have got, downtrodden? Would you got just completely overtaken with grief, with sorrow, with anxiety? The opportunity is there for you to get upset about your situation. But Joseph did not do that. He knew that God was in control. This is a beautiful example of Joseph taking and having these talents, but using them for the Lord, using them to prosper those whose hand he was in. And they saw that, from the jailkeeper to Potiphar, they saw that God was the one who was blessing him, and blessing him because Joseph was putting God first. You and I need to do that in our life, is put God first and have faith in God that he is going to take and overcome these adversities. God is in control no matter what was taking place, no matter what was happening to Joseph. God was in control. And so when you see that and you understand that, then you have to look towards, okay, then how did this all, keep coming about? And next week, we're going to see the providential provision for Israel. We're going to see where it is that God took and cared for his people, no matter what the circumstances were going to be. I love you guys, and I hope to see you soon. And you guys have a great week. Bye-bye.